And that way I can post the video for anybody who happened to miss tonight or wants to go back to that. So just know that I am recording. And then when we get to the Q&A part of the session, I can stop that recording so that your personal questions don't have to be part of that recording that will be posted to the webpage later. But let me just go ahead and start off with some introductions. My name is Crystal Wolf, and I'm the Science and Health TOSA here at Evergreen Public Schools. And I'm a former high school science teacher. I used to teach at Mountain View. And now my job is really supporting science and health teachers and the science and health programs in our district. So as part of that, I'm here to give you a parent preview of what our human growth and development curriculum is for grades 4 through 8. So we're going to get started with that. So you see our agenda here. Again, just welcome. Thank you for being here. It's really great to see so many parents that are interested and involved and want to see what we're teaching and how they can support their own students' growth at home. So again, just thank you for being here. We're going to be going through the flash curriculum that is part of our human growth and development. I'll start off with the elementary grades, and then we'll move to high school. We're also going to be taking a look at some of the videos that go along with that curriculum that are at the elementary level, and we'll have time for question and answers. We're going to view a short sample of the video, and then at the end of the session, I'll show the entire video preview. So if you're just here for a sample and you kind of get the picture of what that looks like and that's good enough, then don't feel like you have to stay for the entire preview, but I do want to make sure that everybody has a chance to view the puberty workshop videos in their entirety. So that'll be towards the end of our agenda. There is a chat box down below, and so you can put your questions here, and I'll be periodically checking in on the chat, and I'll do my best to answer any questions that you have. Also, if you want to come off of mute and ask those questions verbally, that is totally fine as well. I've got a couple emails in my inbox that I'm going to just take a quick look at. Some folks who I think are looking for the password. So let me just throw that their way and then we'll get started. Just make sure I'm getting everybody situated. And thanks for your patience. Okay. Elementary is considered grades 4th and 5th grade is where we teach the human growth and development curriculum, and then middle school is 6th, 7th, and 8th. There is sexual health curriculum in the high school, but that's in the CTE department. And so if they're doing a parent preview night, that'll be separate from the elementary and middle school nights. As far as the timing of when the flash curriculum is taught, it varies from building to building and teacher to teacher, but they will let you know in advance of when they plan on starting those lessons. So once again, I do have that link to our webpage. And so if you are looking for a copy of these slides, that is on our webpage along with a lot more information. So that's your resource for anything that I covered today. And also I'll be posting the recording of this on that website probably next week. So just a couple things. This is our first of a couple parent preview nights. We do one in the fall and one in the spring. This year, the fall one is going to be conducted virtually. As you can tell, we're on Zoom tonight. The spring one, the format's still to be determined. We had about 160 parents register for this tonight, and with our current COVID restrictions, we can't accommodate that many folks in one space in our district office. So as the year progresses and hopefully COVID starts to die down a little bit, we might be able to do in-person previews in the spring. So I'm just kind of leaving that up to time to determine. But we are required to offer parents the opportunity to preview the material 1 month before instruction occurs. And we can show the written materials. If your teacher of your student is going to have a guest speaker, they'll give you information about that. But I'm really here today to show you our adopted curriculum along with the video previews. So that's really the purpose of this evening. The previews are not required to be attended, but it is something that we encourage parents to get to know. So a little bit about our curriculum. We use the Family Life and Sexual Health curriculum, the FLASH curriculum, which comes out of King County, out of the Seattle area, and it's developed specifically to meet our Washington state health standards. It's actually the most widely used sexual health curriculum in the state, and it is medically and scientifically accurate and state approved for use. And we here at Evergreen adopted this curriculum back in 2016. And FLASH curriculum contains a series of lessons. Evergreen intentionally adopted a selection of those lessons. So we don't teach every single lesson of the FLASH curriculum, but we teach the ones that meet our district needs and that also meet the requirements for education in our state. You'll notice that the curriculum is kind of more traditional in nature with some worksheets and traditional pedagogy. Teachers can adapt that pedagogy, but they have to stick to the content that is part of those lessons. So that's a little bit about FLASH. Also, as part of our Washington State Health curriculum, we also have HIV and AIDS education requirements, and those begin in 5th grade. And so students are supposed to receive yearly instruction on HIV and AIDS. And again, parent previews need to take place for that. So we kind of roll those both into one. With tonight's parent preview as well as the one in the spring. All right, questions in the chat? Okay, we're going good so far. A little bit about the early years. There's no sexual health content that's taught in grades K through 3, but we do have what's called social emotional learning. And so social emotional learning really is a place where students get some instruction that really supports them throughout their years in Evergreen, and that continues on throughout their grades. But in the early grades, this includes things like self-awareness, social awareness, self-management, management of social situations, self-efficacy, and social engagement. There are themes that teachers go through, including readiness to learn, community building, empathy, how to manage your emotions and solve problems, as well as celebrations. I am going to pop another link into the chat. Our social emotional learning team has their own webpage. And so if you are interested in checking out some more of those resources, the social emotional learning webpage is in the chat, and it's also linked in the slide deck on our webpage. So if you want to dive into a little bit more about what that looks like, those resources are available for you as well. Okay, let me take a look at my screen sharing settings. It looks like I'm having a little bit of something getting cut off there. Let me see.
Right. Yeah. Yes, everything's fine.
Okay, good. Okay, good to know. Okay, so kindergarten, K through 3, social emotional learning. No sexual health content. If you've heard any misinformation on that, we don't have any sexual health content here at Evergreen in those early grades. On to grade 4. So in grade 4, that's where our human growth and development curriculum begins. And so our state standards include anatomy and physiology, growth and development, reproduction. For us, HIV begins in grade 5, and also healthy relationships. And grade 5 is very similar, adding in that HIV prevention. So here is an overview of the lessons that are taught in each grade. So 4th grade starts off with family, self-esteem, and decision-making. And then we get into lessons on consent and sexual abuse and reporting abuse. These lessons used to be called sexual exploitation, and that terminology is just a little unfamiliar and big words for little kids. And so we've kind of switched up those lessons. They've been updated recently. And so if you've been familiar with our curriculum before, sexual exploitation is now updated to include consent. We've got puberty lessons as well as the reproductive system. You'll see that in the 5th grade, some of those lessons are repeated. As our students grow and develop, sometimes those lessons that they received the year before, just they're in a different place with their bodies and their development. And so there's a lot of repetition in the curriculum to make sure that it's matching student needs as they go through puberty. You'll see in 5th grade, we add in the HIV and AIDS days, day 1 and 2. And then also the reproductive system, day 1 is repeated, and then day 2 is added in the 5th grade. So that's just kind of the overview of the lessons there. The curriculum in Flash has accurate and detailed medical vocabulary. That's the terminology that teachers would use in discussions and in their activities. There are diagrams that are the internal and external body parts, and we label them with the medical terms, making sure that students know what all of their parts are and what they mean. Again, the focus of the curriculum is on facts, and it's medically and scientifically accurate. With sexual health and human growth and development, oftentimes students have a lot of questions. And so we have teachers trained in what's called the values question protocol. Teachers are here to educate students on the factual parts of the health curriculum. But as far as questions that get into morals, values, things that are personal in nature or are things that are family values, we refer those questions back to the family. And so teachers have a question protocol to deal with that. If they get a difficult question, they do their very best to answer the factual part with correct scientific information. And if it's a values-based question, we follow a protocol to make sure that they refer back to a trusted adult like their parents. So here's a little overview of that question protocol. We always validate student questions. We want them to feel like they are comfortable and safe in asking questions. We can always reframe a question if needed, but we can identify the belief part of a question. If there's a belief or a value in there, we'll answer the factual part if there is one, and then help the class understand that people have a wide range of beliefs, and that's okay. And that really it's a part of family, clergy members, and other trusted adults to help the students kind of come to understand where their own values are. And so just know that about our question protocol. So that is a very quick overview. I want to pop into a couple of lessons and show you what the lessons look like so you have a chance to see them. I'm also going to take a look at the chat, which I lost my chat window, to see if I've got any questions in there as well. Let's see, chats, a couple questions. Daryl, yes, you can opt out. I'll be going over the opt-out form and your options for that. And if 4th grade didn't do the last year due to COVID, will this be both 4th and 5th grades? So the 5th grade classes this year would be teaching the 5th grade lessons. Teachers are aware that last year was a little bit different. The great thing about the Flash curriculum is, again, there's a lot of repetition. And so there's a lot of the 4th grade lessons that do get repeated in 5th grade. Okay. Let me pop into a couple of the lessons that I'd like for us to take a look at. So I want to make sure that we get a chance to look at some of the new updates from sexual exploitation, which is now called consent and sexual abuse. And give me a thumbs up if you can see that lesson on the screen. Great. Okay, so this is the lesson that the teachers would see. And so they would obviously adapt this for their class, but you'll see the student learning objectives for this lesson: define consent, recognize when consent has and has not been freely given, define sexual abuse, and explain the importance of telling an adult about sexual abuse. So it's got the agenda for the lesson. Key concepts, these are the big takeaways that we want every student to walk away with. Everyone has the right to say who touches their body and how. It's never okay to touch someone or make someone else touch you if they don't want to. If a kid has been touched in a way that makes them uncomfortable, it's really important to tell a grown-up who can help. So those are kind of the big themes that are part of this particular lesson. So you'll see in the activities, the teacher makes sure to define what consent is and how it's obtained, excuse me. We go through examples, and those examples start off with really simple kind of everyday things. Ben takes a pencil off John's desks and walks away with it. John doesn't say anything. Was that consent or no consent? Little class discussion there. And then it gets into more serious issues, and especially with power imbalances. So, people sometimes feel pressured to say yes to something because the person asking them is older or has power over them. This can happen to kids because kids are taught to respect adults and do what they ask. Usually that's a good idea. But adults are never supposed to touch kids on their private parts unless it's a doctor and they have the kids and the parents' permission. So really going through some of that specific language about what would be inappropriate and appropriate touch. And then it goes into what is sexual abuse and how to deal with reporting that if that occurs, or if you're a kid who hears about that happening to somebody else. So we know about the prevention strategies with sexual abuse, that when kids know that they have a safe adult that they can go to, that they trust to talk about abuse or inappropriate touch, that is one of the #1 prevention strategies. And so that's part of that evidence-based flash curriculum that we have. Goes through a couple of scenarios, and then some true false statements to help just clarify what is sexual abuse, and what are some of the misconceptions around that. You'll see in a lot of the lessons that there are options for family homework. And so the homework for families is always optional, but we point students home to make sure that there's a connection there, that they have an opportunity to have a conversation with you about your own values, your own systems, the safe people that they can go to in the case of this lesson. And so there's always that opportunity to make a connection at home. Any questions about this particular lesson on consent and sexual abuse? Okay, I've got a couple questions in the chat. So we've got a question about separation of gender. So currently right now in elementary school, most schools do separate boys and girls. There are some schools that don't, and they will always let you know if they're not going to be separated by gender. So that's something that we're kind of in discussions about right now, but as it stands right now, the general practice is to separate girls and boys, and then to let you know if for some reason that's not the case. With COVID last year, that was a little different because we had cohorts of students. And so if there is any reason why the situation would be different, then that is something that would be communicated by the teacher. And when we have children who are non-binary, we work with the teacher to make sure that the solution and the situation is welcoming and inclusive for that child. So that might mean that they do things a little differently, but we do our best to support all of our kids. Christy, I don't know which school, so that would be a question that you could refer to the teacher, and they would be able to let you know what their plans are for this year. So we have a question about reporting abuse. So if a student shares something about sexual abuse, so as educators, we are mandatory reporters. If a teacher hears about sexual abuse, or a counselor or any other staff member, we're required to report that, and there's a protocol that goes along with that. Again, it probably depends on who that abuse is being reported about. Obviously, if that student is reporting that their parent is the abuser, then we're not just going to go directly to that parent and say, hey, here's this allegation. But there are protocols to keep kids safe. And it's not really something that I would deal with as a curriculum specialist, but it's something that the building administrators would be dealing with, and the counseling staff as well. And they would follow those reporting protocols that are in place. Let's see. So a question about the order of the lessons. So the order that I showed you in the slideshow is the order that we go through. And so Flash kind of has that lined out. Let me go back to my slideshow here. So preview of the lessons. So 4th grade starts with family, self-esteem, then decision-making, then consent, and reporting abuse, puberty, and the reproductive system is last. So there is kind of a build up to that anatomy lesson. When we get to the consent and sexual abuse, it talks more about just private parts, the areas in your swimsuit that shouldn't be touched. And then we get more specific into the terminology in that reproductive system. Again, the lessons are repeated. So after 4th grade, they should be familiar with those terms, but again, it's repeated in 5th grade. The reproductive system is again repeated in 6th grade. And then there's more advanced lessons in 7th and 8th grade that deal with the reproductive system as well. So lots of opportunities for students to get that learning. Let's see, let me just go into a couple of other items that might answer some questions as well. Generally speaking, it's mostly the teachers who are doing the instruction, but on occasion, there might be a situation where you've got a really involved school nurse who likes to come in and do the anatomy portions of the lessons. Sometimes our counselors do come in and talk about abuse with the students. And so there might be some other staff members, and the school and the teacher will let you know if it's not just the teacher teaching the lessons. So that's something, especially with COVID, we had a lot of people just supporting each other. And so like I know there was a nurse who made a lot of videos for the teachers who were still teaching online. In middle school, the sexual health education is actually taught by our science teachers. Okay, so that, oh yes, and then again, I mentioned a little bit about the family homework, but I wanted to go over that again. So again, families are really our partners in learning. I know that human growth and development, puberty, reproduction, that can be a pretty awkward topic sometimes. So I really see us as partners in this learning. It's great that students have an opportunity to learn about the factual stuff in their classes with their teachers, but really they also have that opportunity to learn about those things with you. And so it really is a partnership. Again, we have those family homework lessons to help kind of facilitate those conversations between you and your students. The homework that happens at home, it's private. We don't collect that. Teachers don't grade that homework. It's really just about connecting students to their families and your values and your opportunity to have those conversations. So just know that. There's my slide about separating by gender. I know I kind of talked about it a little bit already, but again, we generally do separate by gender in 4th and 5th grade. And in middle school, it is going to differ by school and grade level. So you're going to want to check with your child's teacher if that's a concern for you. Teachers should consult with parents and students in situations where that separation might cause an issue for students. So there's options there for any other situation that arises. And then we have a question back to that consent lesson about appropriate contact between peers. Let's go back and take a look at that lesson again. So when we talk about consent, we really talk about it in a broad sense first and then get specific. So we talk about consent in general with peers and any sort of interaction you might have in the classroom where somebody's doing something to you that makes you feel uncomfortable. That would be an example of not having consent. And then it does get more specific. So there's kind of that umbrella of consent really is about a lot of things. But then it does also get to the inappropriate touching. So like it talks about borrowing pencils, for example, and hugs, and what consent can mean in that context. And then as far as inappropriate touching, adults are never allowed to touch kids in a sexual way. The law says that it's not possible for kids to give consent for adults to touch them sexually because adults have so much more power than kids do. So it talks about that. And then, so again, this is a lot more about the power imbalance with adults. And then consent for kids is really anything that makes you uncomfortable, you have the right to say no to. So it's more broad in the kid sense and it gets pretty specific about adults. Again, it's a law with adults, and with students, there's not necessarily a law, but we know that it's inappropriate and there are school policies around that. Bullying and harassment and things like that come into play. Hopefully I answered that question. Okay, I do have a question about being able to review the curriculum online. So let me get into some of the details there. So the Flash curriculum for elementary and those lessons are freely available on the Flash website. Our middle school curriculum is copyrighted. So I can show you some of those lessons tonight, but there's going to be a way to virtually check out the copyrighted middle school materials. And I'll get to that a little later in another slide, but let me go ahead and give you that Flash web page so that you can have that link. And again, we've adopted some of the lessons from Flash, but not all of them. So when you go to the Flash web page, you're going to see this list of all of these different lessons. Again, Evergreen Public Schools doesn't teach all of these lessons. Here is that link in the chat. For fourth grade, we teach family, self-esteem, and decision-making. We have the updated versions of sexual exploitation, the consent one I just showed you. We've got puberty and the reproductive system. And in fifth grade, we teach HIV and AIDS. So we don't teach the pregnancy lessons, for example. So feel free to look at all of these lessons, but know that the list on our webpage is the lessons that we have adopted, and Flash offers more lessons beyond that. So feel free to peruse that, and you can go through every single lesson there on that Flash webpage for elementary level. For 7th and 8th grade, again, those are copyright protected, and I have another way for you to access those that you can sign up to. Yes, so as far as opting out, so if you are looking at these lessons and some of them feel like appropriate for your student and some of them don't, our opt-out form allows you to select which lessons you'd like your student to be a part of. And so this opt-out is on our webpage. It's also linked in the slide deck. So you can opt out of either all of the curriculum or part of the curriculum. And you would return that form either in email or hard paper copy to the teacher. And there'll be an alternative educational opportunity. So let me just click into the opt-out form. So it just has a place for name, student name, grade, school. You see the lessons listed there, and you would check the boxes of the ones you want to opt out of. Signature there, a copy goes to the teacher and to your district's or your student's file. So we make sure that we keep that on record. So that's your decision, and that's the opt-out form. Where do the kids go if they opt out? It's going to depend teacher to teacher and building to building. Sometimes they might go with another class for that period of time. They might go to the library, but there'll be another alternative place for them to go while the lesson is being taught. Okay, so that's my quick overview of elementary, and I want to give some time if there's specific lessons here in 4th or 5th grade that you'd like me to click into and just take some time to look at. Do they learn the anatomy of both genders? Great question. So in 4th grade, they learn their own gender, and 5th grade, they learn both, is generally how that works. And I'm just looking back through the chat to see if there's anything I missed. We had a question about textbooks. So we don't have a textbook, we have these Flash lessons. They are just basically photocopies of the Flash curriculum. So it's not an actual physical textbook, but it's a curriculum. So taking a look at these topics, are there any of these particular lessons you'd like me to go through, or do you want to preview them on your own online? Either way, I'm happy to kind of walk through a couple more of these before we move on to middle school. Courtney, gender roles is not one of the lessons that Evergreen has adopted at this time. It is certainly one we're looking at and in discussions with, especially around our equity work. But at this time, it's not adopted, and to become adopted, it does go through a process, but is something we're in discussion about. Other questions? So puberty, let's take a closer look at the puberty lessons. So when I go into puberty, here's our lesson. And so in fourth grade, again, they would focus on, if the class was separated by gender, they would focus on the gender of that group for fourth grade. And then in fifth grade, they would learn about both. So puberty day 1, so you see there, they may be separated by gender. Sometimes you might want to teach reproductive lesson 1 before, so teachers might make that judgment call to get the anatomy before they talk about puberty. So when we talk about puberty, we're describing those physical, emotional, and social changes of puberty, that it's triggered by hormones from the endocrine system. And then we have some of the definitions of different things that can occur when you're going through puberty, including erections, menstruation, nocturnal emissions, ovum, puberty, sperm. So those are some of the terms. There's an explanation of bras and athletic supports, along with menstrual hygiene products like pads, tampons, and different things that girls might use when they start their period. So when we look through the lesson, we talk about developments, defining what puberty is. We also focus on some of the things that both genders or all genders are going to have in common, including growth spurts, changes to the body like broadening shoulders and hips, breast development, acne, perspiration and odors from your sweat changing, and hair growth, both pubic and underarm hair growth, facial hair, voice changes, sperm production, egg production, menstruation. So all of those are the things that are part of that puberty lesson as far as physical changes. It also talks about emotional changes and how when we go through puberty, we experience a surge of hormones. And so crushes and attractions might be a new thing, self-consciousness, mood swings, and when students have concerns, who they might want to ask about that, including like doctors or counselors if they think that there's a question that they have that they're worried about. We also talk about relationships with parents, and as hormone changes happen, sometimes you get in more fights or have more friction with your parents. And you also have that urge to want to make more decisions on your own and be more independent as you grow towards adulthood. So those are some of the things that are part of the lesson. And then there's some worksheets that are really about getting to know some of those terms. We've got the girls' worksheets and the boys' worksheet. So that's that first day. And then the second day gets into puberty facts and myths, feelings, recognizing the timing of a change of an individual. And we've got the anonymous question box as well with that values question protocol. And peer pressure also comes into this as well. So day 2 is really getting a little bit more in depth, having opportunities to ask questions, learning a little bit more about true and false misconceptions about puberty. So there's a worksheet for boys and a worksheet for girls as well. So fourth graders are not learning the others, gender, anatomy. So there's a lot of different ways to refer to body parts. And just because, so we do want students to know the medical terms for all of the parts. And at the same time, we also recognize that students have language for those parts that might be different than the medical terms. So we might refer to that, for example, as private parts. Basically anything inside of a swimsuit would be considered a private part that for adult to touch would definitely be wrong. So yes, we do want students to learn all of the parts, but again, there's a developmental progression, and at least here at Evergreen, we kind of start slow with fourth grade. And then again, there's more repetition throughout the grades. So that's kind of the way we structure that. Again, we partner with parents. So if your student knows those terms already before they hit fourth grade, that's great as well. Just for our kind of progression through the lessons, we introduce their own gender in fourth grade and then both genders in fifth grade at this point. Got a question about decision making. So let's take a look at that one. So this one is going to help students identify ways people make decisions, active decision-making versus passive decision-making. And you can kind of see how this might feed into abuse prevention, right? There's actively saying yes or no, and then just kind of going along with somebody, which could happen with peer pressure or adult pressure in the event of an abuser. And so we talk about those two different types of decisions and how you can act. So active and passive decisions, we talk about just decisions in general, the types of decisions we make as students all of the time, like what to wear, whether to eat breakfast, what to have to breakfast for breakfast. We're kind of in the realm of assigned seats right now, but who do you sit with on the bus? Who do you walk to school with? And then getting into thinking about which of those decisions are passive and which of those are active. And we make active decisions in 4 steps. So we have alternatives. Whenever we're making a decision, we're generally making a choice. So what are those options? We consider those consequences of the decision, positive and negative for each alternative. We think about our feelings, our own feelings, and also the feelings of whoever that decision might impact, as well as our beliefs and our values. So that's kind of that active decision-making process. And some examples about, if you skip breakfast, you can weigh those pros and cons of what the impacts of that decision might have. We get into some like trickier questions too, like you see your friend shoplift and nobody else seems to have noticed. You could be a passive decision maker in that situation or an active decision maker. A guy or girl in your class asks you to go study with them or have a date with them, and your parents say you can't go on a date until you're 15. So what's the decision-making process there? So we go through some of those decision-making situations and think about beliefs, that whole process, and how you be an active decision maker. Thanks, Katie. So that is the decision-making worksheet with alternatives, thinking about those good and bad consequences for each option. That's a little quick overview of that lesson. Any other elementary lessons we want to jump into before I go to a little bit of a preview of the puberty workshop video? Okay, so alongside of our flash lessons, we also have a supplemental DVD called the Puberty Workshop. And we're going to watch the whole thing at the end of here if you want to hang around for the whole 70 minutes of video. But basically, there are 5 videos that are about 10 to 15 minutes each. We're going to take a look at a 4-minute video clip so you can kind of get a sense of what those videos are like. And hopefully the sound will work on.
Hey, I'm Damien.
And I'm.
Okay, so thumbs up, you can see the young man and woman, and thumbs
Allie.
up if you can
And
hear
this
the
is the Puberty Workshop.
sound. How's the sound? Good.
We know you've got a lot of questions about puberty.
Like, what exactly is puberty?
And that's why we're here, along with other young people just like you.
Helping us answer your questions are Dr. Peter Rochelle and Dr. Lisa Thornton.
So let's get started. So, is puberty really that big of a change?
It's a pretty big change. Not as dramatic or as fast as we just saw, but pretty fast. A lot happens to the human body to both males and females during puberty.
Puberty is the period between childhood and adulthood when biological changes happen. It's over when full adult height is achieved. Now, adolescence is the period of time when social and emotional changes are happening, and its boundaries are less specific than puberty. Everyone's body has their own schedule for these changes, but the process takes about 5 years from start to finish. Other changes happen too as you become a teen and then an adult. You'll start to take on more responsibility and become less dependent on your family as you learn to take care of yourself.
I think what happens inside of your body when puberty starts, you produce more hormones.
Your body it grows differently to match your...
Well, for girls, you'll hit your period.
Your voice is changing and your body's changing and stuff.
Honestly, I don't know how puberty gets started.
Well, the endocrine system is really at the heart of the beginning of puberty. It kickstarts us. In girls, the ovaries start to produce estrogen. In boys, testicles start to produce testosterone. It's these hormones that begin puberty.
The endocrine system is an information signal system, like the nervous system, but it works differently. The nervous system uses electrical impulses to make short-term changes happen, like telling a hand that it needs to be pulled away from an open flame and fast.
The endocrine system uses chemical messengers called hormones to start the changes of puberty. It's a slow process and can last for several years.
Hormones are released from different glands into the bloodstream, where they travel throughout the human body, regulating metabolism, growth and development, tissue function, and mood.
The pituitary gland, sometimes called the master gland, controls growth as well as other gland functions. The thyroid gland controls metabolism and weight. The adrenal glands control the release of adrenaline for extra energy when needed. And the pancreas controls the release of insulin to help regulate blood sugar.
You've probably heard of other glands, such as sweat glands, oil glands, salivary glands, and tear glands.
Puberty begins when the pituitary gland sends signals to the male and female sex organs, the testicles and the ovaries, that it's time to start doing their job. In girls, the ovaries begin producing a hormone called estrogen. In boys, the testicles produce a hormone called testosterone.
There are also other hormones that have a role, progesterone and androgen. It's really cool that these new chemicals are produced and continue to be produced to support an adult body.
So that's the general
I'm
format
Damien.
of the puberty workshop videos. So those characters that you see there are in all of the videos. So you have these young adults, the blonde girl and the black man. You've got a couple of students, and then you've got the doctors, the male and female doctor. And so the videos are what is puberty, and then there's new emotions and new feelings, and then there's an HIV and AIDS video. And again, we'll play the entirety of the videos at the end here. But that's kind of a snapshot of what the format is of those videos. Every librarian has a copy that they check out to teachers to use in their classrooms, and they can often set up a parent preview as well. So if you do need to go back and view that full video, we can usually arrange that with your school and the teacher librarian at your school. Any questions about that short little preview before we move on to middle school? Okay. Went through that. Opting out, we went through that. Next up, middle school. So again, sexual health education in our middle schools is taught through our science classes. We have in the past had some health electives, but not every student takes middle school health. And so in order to make sure that all students have access to the sexual health curriculum, our science teachers teach that. Sixth grade sometimes teaches it in the fall. Most 7th and 8th grade teachers teach that in the spring. And again, they'll let you know the specific time when they'll be starting those lessons. Like I said, the elementary lessons are online on that Flash web page. Now for middle school, that curriculum is copyright protected. So I'm gonna share a couple of those lessons with you here so we can kind of preview them together. But if you would like the digital online access to preview those middle school lessons on your own time and be able to go really thoroughly through them, I'm gonna pop a link into the chat that you can sign up for middle school preview. And then I would be emailing you a login so that you can get access to the copyrighted materials to peruse and preview on your own. So just pick a line and you would put your name and contact information in there. And I will be at a conference the end of this week. So starting beginning of next week, you'll see some emails from me getting you access to that. That's kind of how we're doing the full preview there, where you can have plenty of time to look at the materials. So a little bit about our state standards and the lessons for middle school. So middle school is grades 6, 7, and 8. Flash considers 6th grade part of their elementary package. So when we look at the state standards for 6th grade, we've got, again, anatomy, reproduction and pregnancy, puberty and development. We've got prevention of STDs, healthy relationships, and Washington state laws. So those are the standards in 6th, 7th, and 8th. And the 6th grade lessons come out of that elementary package. And so you'll see some repetition from what students learned about in 4th and 5th grade. So you'll see a repeat of consent and sexual abuse and reporting abuse, puberty day 1 and 2, reproductive system day 1 and 2, and then HIV and AIDS. So if you are a parent of a 6th grader and you want to preview that curriculum, that link to the Flash webpage from King County, you can see the 6th grade lessons there because they're considered in Flash part of the elementary package. For 7th and 8th grade, the lessons are the next developmental level up. So we have the reproductive system and pregnancy. We have our lesson about saying no, which includes abstinence. We have preventing STDs, birth control methods, and then rules of dating is a lesson that we started a pilot last year in 8th grade. And then we're going to kind of continue that pilot this year. The feedback, we didn't really generate enough feedback last year with hybrid learning and online learning. So I want to make sure that teachers have an opportunity to really try out that lesson in their full classes in a more normal situation. So let me go ahead and click into some of those middle school lessons so you can take a look at what they include. I'm going to go ahead. Does anybody have a particular lesson they'd like me to start with? We've got reproductive system and pregnancy, saying no, STDs, birth control, rules of dating. Any of those that we'd like to see? Can pop it in the chat. Rules of dating, sure. So rules of dating is kind of along the lines of a little bit about consent, right? If you're getting to 8th grade, and especially as you're thinking towards high school, a lot of your peers might start thinking about having a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a relationship. And so this lesson is really about explaining the qualities of a healthy dating relationship and how to be safe and respectful and equitable in relationships. So key concepts there, again, kind of that consent piece. Everybody has a right to say who touches their body and how. It's never okay to touch somebody else if they don't want you to, or to make them touch you. There are laws about sex that everyone must follow, and permission or agreement is required to engage in all sexual activity. We also have an idea about rigid ideas about how men and women should act are harmful and limit how people can express themselves. So those are some of those key concepts that we know help prevent sexual violence. And so this lesson also includes a little bit of rationale about why rules of dating could be a really important lesson, and some of the research that's gone into developing the lesson. When we look at what the lesson is for students, we start off with a warm-up, describe a characteristic of a healthy dating relationship and why that might be important. And then we brainstorm and discuss dating behaviors. And we really talk about 3 stages of a relationship. So there's the beginning and the middle. And then for a lot of relationships, there's also an end. And so what does that look like? So step 1, that beginning of the relationship, asking somebody out or getting together, like how do you communicate the beginning of a relationship? What does that look like? And of course, there's an opportunity to say no if you're not comfortable being in that relationship and somebody asks you out. We have step 2, the dating or going out phase. What sorts of things do people do when they're dating? How do they treat each other? How do they talk to other people about their boyfriend or girlfriend? And then we have stage 3, breaking up. And of course, there's a lot of emotions around that, and there can be a lot of heartache. And so how do people break up with each other? How do they talk about their ex to other people? What sort of specific behaviors would you see if somebody's breaking up? and just thinking about, what that looks like and what that might mean to students as they go through those stages, or they see their friends go through those stages. This lesson also gets into some of our state laws. So it's important for students to know that there are laws about sex and relationships, and there's an age of consent. So let's see. And then this also talks about fairness. What does it mean to be fair? And there's a commission worksheet. Actually, let me skip down to the worksheet because I think it makes it a little more clear. So we've got our steps of dating, and then we've got our state laws. That's what I was looking for. So in Washington State, a person has to be 18 years old to get married. A person can get married to someone of any gender. It talks about at age 16, a person can legally give their permission to have sex. If someone is under the age of 16 and chooses to have sex or engage in sexual touch, they can only legally consent to someone who is close in age. And so it just kind of goes into some of those laws and making sure that we understand that it's not okay to be, especially in a sexual relation with an older person. And then there's the US laws as well. Rules of dating. So the activity in this lesson is about creating rules of dating, and the guidelines are that they must be fair, they must work for everyone, they must promote respect and fairness between the people who are dating and not cause harm, and cover specific situations like handling disagreements or making decisions, or how people talk to each other or show affection, and how to handle somebody telling them no. So it just gives students an opportunity to kind of talk through what are some of those important aspects of dating relationships. There's again a family aspect to this and talking about dating. So making sure that students are able to go home and have a conversation about what are your family values, what are your family rules about dating, when is it okay to date, what kinds of activities are okay on dating, and getting ready for that progression into adulthood, and what does that look like for your family. Yeah, so that's that dating lesson. Any questions on rules of dating? I know I'm going pretty quickly through that. I'll also go into birth control. So lesson 7 is our birth control methods. The objectives here are to be able to describe how birth control methods can reduce the risk of pregnancy, define emergency contraceptive, the benefits of birth control, and resources for reproductive and sexual health care services. So this lesson really goes into just different types of birth control, and whether people need that, or learn about birth control, whether people need the information to prevent pregnancy now or in the future. So even if you're not sexually active at this age, just knowing that a lot of the education that happens now can be education you might need to know in the future. We've got, actually let's skim down here. So the student warm up there is true or false. Most people have used some kind of birth control to prevent pregnancy the first time they have vaginal intercourse. And so we're talking a little bit about some of the misconceptions there. And then we've got the different types. And so the types of birth control that are introduced in this lesson are the IUD. And so there's a picture of what it looks like and just some of the basic information about IUDs and how they work. We've got the implant. So this is the one that goes under the skin and is a hormone. Again, it talks about with each type of birth control, whether or not they prevent or protect against STDs and HIV. We've got the condom. So there's a picture of a condom. We don't use actual condoms in class, but we do have this worksheet that shows what a condom is. We've got emergency contraception, the pill, the depot shot, the hormonal shot, the birth control pill, the patch, the vaginal ring, and withdrawal. And so those are the ones that are talked about. So abstinence, good question. So abstinence is part of our saying no lesson. So the birth control lesson really goes into all of the different types of contraception that are available if you are sexually active or wanting to prevent pregnancy or STDs and HIV. If we go into the saying no lesson, that's where we look at abstinence. So again, abstinence is choosing not to have oral, anal, or vaginal sex. Most high school students are abstinent. Choosing abstinence means a person does not have to worry about pregnancy or STDs. People of every sexual orientation and gender identity choose abstinence, and you can choose abstinence at any point in your life. So that's kind of the basic information we want students to get out of that lesson. And abstinence really is pretty common among teens. And it also talks about refusal skills and how to say no to something you're not comfortable with. Say no, explain why, suggest an alternative, and leave if you need or want to. So practicing those refusal skills. And again, there is also that, there's a couple scenarios there. So walking through some scenarios and seeing if the scenario includes the checklist of saying no, explaining why, alternatives, and leaving. And then the family homework at the end, individual homework, and then there's family homework. So ask the adult, what kind of rules or expectations do you have for me about dating? How do you think someone would know if it's the right time for them to have sex? How do you think someone would know it's the right time for them to have sex? So those are the opportunities to have those conversations at home. Yeah, so consent, again, in this saying no lesson, it really is, again, kind of a repetition of consent, that you have the opportunity to say no at any time with anything that makes you feel uncomfortable. And so the saying no lesson is kind of the middle school version that includes consent. And we also see that repeated in dating as well, that you don't have to say yes to a relationship if that makes you uncomfortable or you don't want to go out with that person. That's another opportunity to practice consent and those refusal skills. All right, so at this point, that's kind of my overview. And again, I can go back to any of those lessons and we can look through them in more detail. I've also got a bunch of folks that have signed up on the digital preview. I'll pop that link in the chat one more time. So if you're a parent of a middle school student and you want a chance to go through all those lessons in more detail, just sign up there and I'll make sure to get that to you. Let's take a look at preventing STDs, which would be where our HIV comes in for middle school. Too far. Sorry. So in this one, we kind of go through some true false statements. So talking about HIV/AIDS, HIV is found in blood, semen, vaginal fluid, breast milk. So where is it found? What are some of the signs of STDs? How is it spread? Talking about some of the impacts of STDs and how they can impact, for example, the ability of people to get pregnant. Talking about treatment. So HIV cannot be cured, but there are lots of treatments currently for HIV that people can live a long time with the help of a doctor and medication. Anyone can get an STD, and the ways that you can get an STD. The most effective way to protect against HIV and other STDs is to not have sex and not inject drugs. If you are having sex, what are the prevention strategies? So condoms are the best way for a person who has vaginal, anal, or oral sex to protect themselves. Many STDs can be cured and treated, and then there's symptoms that can let you know sometimes if you have an STD, but sometimes you don't have symptoms. And of course, there's abstinence, and a person can choose abstinence at any point in their life, and that is the safest way to prevent STDs and HIV. So the student worksheets include a crossword puzzle. They include some resources from Clark County as well, and some other sexual health resources from the US. This persuasion map is kind of an activity encouraging students to think about actions that they can take to prevent the spread of HIV and STDs, create an argument about that, why it's important, what are some of the supporting facts. And then we've got a list of facts about STDs, including HIV, how it can be prevented, a little bit about abstinence and condoms and testing. Individual homework as well as family homework. And that's the part about persuasion. So the persuasion part is about, for this exercise, the class will act as peer educators, encouraging others to take action against the spread of HIV and STDs. So you're supposed to map out a convincing argument. So you pick one of the main messages that would be a strategy for preventing STDs and HIV, and then why it's important and some supporting facts. So students would pick one of these to talk about. So when we think about HIV and STDs, one of the strategies could be to abstain from sex and prevent yourself from HIV and STDs. So students would write down why they thought that's important and the supporting facts and why that's going to prevent the spread. Same thing with these other two strategies as well. So thinking through the strategies, again, not everybody's going to use every strategy. People have different values around different strategies, but those are the strategies that research shows does help prevent the spread of HIV and STDs. Students would not be graded necessarily on correctness. A lot of these lessons are really more about participation and making sure everybody has the information. There's not necessarily like tests or quizzes that they're getting scored on, and there's not necessarily, especially when it comes to decision making, like what's the best decision. Again, that's going to vary. So it's really about participation and learning. Not even sure if all teachers really even put this in the grade book, more than just like we did the lesson together and the student was participating and learning. More specifics, you could definitely ask your student's teacher about how activities are graded and what that looks like in the grade book. Any other questions, whether they're lesson specific or just general with our human growth and developments? You can absolutely email me. Let me pop my email into the chat. It should also be on your registration email. So if you go back to that email, you should be able to email me there. The curriculum, it depends what time of year the teachers roll it out, but they should be letting you know when they plan to start the lessons. Most teachers do teach this in the spring, but some of our teachers do that earlier in the year. And so this parent preview nights, teachers could start teaching it 1 month from now, but most likely they're going to be teaching it more into the spring. We do have another parent preview night in March as well, just to make sure that everybody has access to a preview night. So it will depend on the individual teacher. And generally what I do after this presentation is I post the video preview, I email teachers and let them know the first preview has occurred. You could start teaching a month from now. Make sure to let parents know about the opt-out forms and when you're going to start the lessons. So you'll get some communication. Depends on what each school does for the opt-out option. There's not a set opt-out option. So you could talk to the individual teacher about, if you do opt out, what would your student be doing while the rest of the class is having that lesson, and they can give you more information about that. I did also want to say that We have a couple of sessions coming up. So if you have any other parents you know who prefer to have a session in Spanish or Russian, I'm doing some sessions a couple weeks from now for those languages with a translator. Again, I'll post this recording on the webpage. And then we have another preview in the spring. It's March 16th. As far as the timing of those lessons, Rachel, and how long they take, I don't know exactly if it's a lesson per day. It might be stretched out longer than that, but each lesson is designed to fit in a 50-minute period for middle school, for example. But sometimes they can be stretched out depending on, class discussion and questions and things like that. Once again, if you have somebody who isn't here today who wants to have a preview of the lesson, I will be posting this recording onto our webpage. And again, the elementary package is available on the Flash webpage out of King County. And for the middle school lessons, the link that I've popped into the chat is how you can sign up to receive a virtual preview of those middle school lessons if you want to spend some more time on them. So we'll do a few more minutes of questions, and then I'll start the videos so we can see that full video preview for those folks who do want to stick around for that. It's about a 70-minute preview, and I've got the list of the segments up there. We watched 4 minutes of the What is Puberty video, and then there's the Girls in Puberty, Boys in Puberty, New Emotions, New Feelings, and HIV/AIDS segments. The links, could they be emailed? So if you go to our Human Growth and Development webpage, this slide deck, a copy of the slide deck is on the webpage. And so if you open up that slide deck, these links are part of that slide deck. So when it gets to the parent preview, the opt-out form, all of those links are part of that slideshow. So you can see those here on the webpage, and you just pop open that slide deck and then everything's there in that package. Any other questions before I start the full video preview? And if you don't want to stick around for that video preview, you don't have to. And again, those videos are in each school library, and the librarian there has those DVDs. So if they are copyrighted, so I can't really just send out copies of them, but you could arrange with your school to go and preview that in your school library as well if you don't have time tonight. But at this point, I do have to stop the recording. I can't record the copyrighted videos and post those. Yeah. All right.